Chloe had always had a beautiful aura that drew people in. But tonight was different. There was a complex energy in the air that made me think that not only would how other people saw her change, but so would how she saw herself and maybe even her marriage. When she and William walked into the party that was being held, they gave off an air of effortless sophistication. One of his college friends started a conversation that made everyone laugh about how the smell of high-end whiskey and expensive perfume mixed, creating an atmosphere of leisurely pleasure. William introduced Chloe to his friends by putting his arm around her waist in a protective way. His voice was friendly, but there was a hint of possessiveness in it. But Chloe could feel his friends' eyes on her, and the way they looked at her made her shiver with a fearful hunger. It wasn't the first time she'd gotten that much attention, but tonight there was something disturbing about it, an eerie undertone that spoke of a hidden desire. William said something that changed the whole mood of the room. He did it with a casual air that hid the strain underneath. Chloe had the power to fascinate everyone there. His speech was happy, but it also had a subtle quality to it that let you know he knew what he was talking about. An unspoken challenge among his friends. A dare that lasted too long as the night went on and the whiskey filled the room. Became charged with dangerous energy. Games that were once innocent and funny took on a sexual tone in the talk, mixed with a double meaning about Tundra that made Chloe's heart beat faster and led her to discover herself. Their attention was on her, and their eyes, which were pulsing with expectation, followed her around the room. The event started with a simple task. The idea that she kissed someone other than her husband made Chloe's heart beat faster. The air was filled with unspoken desires. But when she looked at William, she didn't sense disapproval. She saw a dare and a silent agreement that made her feel stronger. The kiss was thrilling. She felt a secret thrill running through her as their lips touched. An overwhelming feeling of elation returned to her, sparking a dangerous interest in what was going on at that very moment. Chloe went through a change on the inside, a sin that bothered and interested her. The kiss was the start of a dive into the band area. It got harder to hide the looks. A lot of drinks were served. As Chloe sped up, she could feel her inhibitions start to fall apart. The attention and illegal nature of the game fueled the thrilling feeling that ran through her blood, with each dare getting more intense. A realm of sensuality and transgression she had never been to before is pushing her further into unknown territory. William looked at her. Every time he moved, his intense gaze was a mix of possessiveness, anger, and a deeper, more mysterious emotion she couldn't quite understand. His calm observations seemed to make her more brave, pushing her to go beyond her limits even more while William watched closely. Chloe gave herself permission to get more into the game. Every act was more daring than the last, and they all had an illegal closeness to them. There was stress in the room, and there was a lot of unspoken longing in the air. The guys were mesmerized by her every move and listened intently as their words explained Balder's goals. One of William's friends dared her to sit on his lap. Chloe was on edge because William's stare was on her, even if it was only for a moment. After which, she agreed, raising her chin in a firm way, and sat down on the man's lap. He was very aware of how excited everyone in the crowd was, and his hands were firmly on her hips, making her shiver. The men's stares got longer and their comments became more direct about what they were thinking. She felt a mix of fear and excitement with every move she made. Chloe's heart rate went up as she realized that there was an unspoken agreement in the air. Someone had broken through a limit. Someone crossed a line, and the thrill of disobedience was addicting. Chloe's actions got crazier as she was influenced by the exciting atmosphere. As each meeting made her less shy, Dare enjoyed the men's attention and the power she had over them. She stirred up forbidden desires in them. She was the center of their world and the personification of their shared desire. The thrill of being around her was overwhelming. William held his tongue and looked intently at her face the whole time. It was hard to understand, but there was a hint of dark pleasure on the edges of his lips that showed he liked having her around. Chloe gave in to their pressure because she was mesmerized by his intense stare and the tension that they couldn't put into words. They praised her bravery, which pushed her deeper into this illegal area. She was torn between the excitement of the experience and the fear of what might happen as a result. But she couldn't resist the temptation of what was banned. As the night went on, she finally gave in. She accepted the strength and danger of her defiance and went deeper into the darkness of her desire. Not just a game. This was a dive into a world of forbidden desires. A dangerous dance on the edge of having no choice but to end it. As the air became more tense and noticeable sparks of electricity could be heard, Chloe knew that whatever happened next would change her life forever. Later that night, things got even more crazy after she took that first bad step and kissed another guy while William watched closely. William's friends came up with a new game after she agreed, which made them feel better. That went beyond simple words and pointless tasks. It was a game that demanded a more serious and brave response. Their eyes were filled with a desire to eat, and Chloe could feel it deeply. It was a mix of fear and excitement that made her heart race against her chest. The first task looks easier than it really is. Take off your shirt, which is a small thing to do, but the way they saw her naked body made it look like she was suffocating. With her fingertips, Chloe paused a bit. They shook as they moved their fingers over the buttons, and the room's silence made her heart beat faster. William stayed in the corner. His face was hard to read, but it was clear that his eyes were dark. Chloe gave in and unbuttoned one button at a time because he wouldn't step in or say a word. She let them look at her, and as her skin came out, she could feel how closely they were looking at her. It was a painful, slow process, with each undone button showing a new step. As the last button came undone and her blouse split, she could hear the room pause in anticipation. But the events were far from over. Their attention was only on Chloe, and the dares got stronger. More direct, and more demanding. One of Williams's friends, who had a smirk and an even look on his face, dared her to kiss him. She had been faced with this task before, but this time the stakes were higher. The effects were bigger than that. It wasn't just a kiss. It was something she said. A statement. As the kiss went on, Chloe's willingness to give in to her urges was clear. The undeniable electricity between them made her feel a rush of excitement. While the other men watched, she loved the thrill of breaking the rules and going against the limits she had always thought were holy. Their eyes were fixed on her, drawn to the sexy show as the tension in the air rose. Then, all of a sudden, like a dam bursting, the challenges came in fast and hard, pushing Chloe further into a world she barely knew and making her do things she had never planned. Her show, which had been just in her wildest dreams up until then, became real. Chloe was out of air when the men started exploring her body back and forth. Feeling encouraged by her agreement, she felt an exciting mix of fear and excitement in her veins. An intoxicating mix of shame and excitement that she couldn't get rid of. The worst thing about her was the horror that filled her heart. Stronger than any desire, the fact that William didn't say anything and seemed to agree with things getting worse. He was there all the time. He watched her carefully from the shadows while his friends did inappropriate things with his wife. He didn't say a word, and his mysterious attitude made Chloe feel even more uneasy. It was his calm acceptance of quiet broke her more than any of the dares to get closer. The game got tougher as the guys pushed the limits and made their demands stronger. Every part of Chloe's body begged her to refuse until she had to give up all modesty and let their hungry eyes look at her naked body. To regain her honor, but she kept going because of a force stronger than reason, a strong mix of fear and illegal desire. She moved forward with shaking hands, agreeing, leaving her body open and helpless. Being looked at by both of them made her feel very embarrassed. Still, beneath it all, an exciting adrenaline rush went through her veins, making her feel both scared and excited. Chloe could tell they were looking at her, examining every curve and shape of her body. The way they looked at her made her an object, something they both wanted. She had changed into a prize in a cruel game, something like a pawn. Williams, her husband, planned a power move in which friends would test the limits one after the other. As the touches went on, they became more personal and possessive. But William didn't say a word. Chloe's head spun as she tried to figure out what he was trying to say. Why he was quiet, and how ashamed she was. He had an unwavering look and a wicked enjoyment in his eyes. Why did he not step in? Why wasn't he getting her out of this mess? It started out as a silly hobby. But it turned into a moment of insight that cut through the fog of desire and alcohol. It was clear to her that William was enjoying seeing her discomfort. He was excited about the chance to see her give in to the shame his friends were feeling. It was his need and his desire to see her in this state. The discovery broke a fragile trust in her, reducing her to an object of their shared desire and taking away her dignity. The most important part of their relationship had changed. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was like jumping into a deep abyss. A scary fall into a world where wants and power relationships are skewed. Chloe knew for sure that the night wasn't over yet, which made her feel uneasy. Whatever comes next will change the course of her life forever. There is a limit or wall that stops you from going too far. At a point where the mind, if not the body, didn't want to go any further. Still, Chloe had gone beyond that limit. In the past, the night's crimes were making her less determined. The games and dares had turned into a mean-spirited look at power and submission. Going beyond the point of being fun. And the experience was still going on. The room was completely silent, and there was a strong feeling of dread in the air. One of William's friends, who is known for pushing the limits, made a dare that was heard all over the group. He told Chloe that they had to talk to each other. And the word hung in the air, as all eyes were on Chloe, who smelled dirty and filled with a deep, primal desire. Time seemed to stop, intense looks fixed on her, waiting for her to respond. Chloe showed hesitation, as her eyes moved to William. The dare loomed large, signaling a grave sin and a more personal giving up than any other time. She was looking for a sign of disapproval or a hint of safety to keep her from going over the edge. Still, all she got was a quiet nod, a subtle approval that set her course. William, her husband and the man who promised to love and care for her, was letting her put herself down. She felt sick all of a sudden. It was quickly replaced, though, by a strange mix of shame and illegal excitement. Chloe got down on her knees in front of the guy. Her heart was beating very fast against her ribs. She could feel their close attention. The heat from their stares burned her skin. The crowd didn't say anything in response to this act of debasement, which is both holy and profane. While she did the move, the atmosphere changed again. The space had been filled with light-hearted banter before, but now there was an innate tension. As the men watched, a dangerous undercurrent filled with unspoken wants surrounded them. Their eyes were filled with desire and fire, and they enjoyed being in charge of her. Each guy took his prize one at a time. Chloe changed into a way for them to reach their goals, and her mind separated from her body. She hung above what was going on, watching her own fall without bias. It was just the instinctual act itself and the reactions it got from the guys who watched. There was no time to think or rise up against it. She tried to keep her pride and sense of control, but with each guy, another part of her resistance broke down. While she was crumpled, Chloe could feel her identity falling apart and disappearing into the darkness. As the hours of submission went by, she became less and less like the woman she used to be, a wife to a person. In her place, they made a creature that they could use to get what they wanted and then throw away. This thought gave her a shiver down her spine, mixing a strange thrill with a terrifying fear. The men's voices got louder, and their insulting, objectifying words took away any humanity she still had. But Chloe had already given up too much to complain. She was too caught up in the powerful vortex of giving in to care. She had turned into an object and a toy for their pleasure. And even though it made her feel bad, knowing this gave her a forbidden thrill. She was feeling a lot of different emotions at once, like pleasure and shame, desire and disgust. The different feelings were making it hard for her to make sense of them. The excitement was dancing with shame. What could be fun for her about this? Even though she was being dehumanized, she did it anyway, and knowing that made her feel even worse. William stayed in the background as the experience pushed her deeper into this banned area. As he passively watched his wife become worse, his behavior stayed hard to understand. It was a mask for the storm of emotions that were raging inside him. However, Chloe could see the sadness in his eyes, a strange happiness that made her feel cold. In his possession it was. He always wanted what he had set up by being quiet and encouraging in an indirect way. Chloe felt even more ashamed and betrayed because it was clear that he had an erection. Her heart was beating fast. It was too much for her to handle when she realized she had crossed a line. A clear point beyond which she could no longer go back. But along with the shame, there was a strange thrill, a forbidden excitement that she couldn't deny. She felt like she had entered a world she didn't know existed. A world of submission and degradation that both scared and excited her. She had always tried to hide the dark side of herself. But now it was out in the open. She felt both disgusted and strangely excited by her helplessness. The night was filled with endless cycles of giving up and being embarrassed. Each of William's friends pushed Chloe farther away from them. Even though her mind was racing and she felt ashamed, she answered that she was no longer in charge and no longer the woman she had been just an hour before Chloe showed up at that party. Now Chloe is gone, replaced by something they made. A vessel for their wants. As the night went on and Chloe fell deeper into the abyss. She didn't feel like she was in her body. It was like she was watching the scene from afar. She was torn between feelings of shame and pleasure, fear and excitement, in a way that didn't make sense or follow logic. As if by lightning, I suddenly realized that the lines had been crossed and could not be crossed again. Once we crossed the Rubicon in our relationship, we couldn't get away from the allure of our sexy urges or go back on the path we had already chosen. As Chloe walked into the bathroom, the door clicked shut behind her, marking the end of her change. When she looked in the mirror, the harsh neon light showed a face that didn't look anything like the one she knew. This wasn't the sure of herself Chloe who had come to the party. This was a stranger, a ghost of her old self. Her eyes were wide with a creepy mix of things. She looked at her reflection in shock and growing darkness, hoping to find explanations and a sign of her old self. But all she saw was clear proof of her decline. The ghostly touch of their hands lingered on her skin, a haunting memory of how they hurt her. Their never-ending stares burned into her mind and made fun of her submission. And William, her husband, the person who had promised to protect and care for her, had stayed a quiet participant in her humiliation. His implicit approval and voyeurism adding to the shame she willingly accepted. She doused herself in cold water. It was pointless for her to try to get rid of the shame that was covering her like a fog by cutting off all contact with those guys. She was crying, and the water mixed with her tears and ran down her cheeks, making a physical picture of the pain she was feeling inside. Chloe's tears showed how much she had changed in a way that couldn't be undone. As soon as she walked back into the room, she realized she couldn't avoid the results of her choices or change the events that had led her to this point. The mood had changed. The air was thick with a desire to hunt that made them afraid to look away. It used to be hidden behind a facade of society. But now it cut through her with a primal, visceral intensity. They had already experienced her submission. And they wanted more. William, her husband, stayed quiet and watched. His eyes were black with acceptance. And his arousal was a clear sign of his bad desires. He liked it when she made fun of how quiet he was. It was a silent sign of how bad they were becoming as people. The men were inspired by her submission. So they quickly pushed the limits even further. When the thin veneer of social norms broke, a deep-seated desire came to the surface. They kept making more requests. And their voices got shaky. With a sense of obsessive entitlement. They made Chloe's thoughts dull and her body into just a way for them to get what they needed. She learned about herself. Following every order meant doing something shameful, which was another step into the abyss. She was caught in a web of shame and illegal joy, like a marionette being manipulated by their never-ending desires. Her independence was lost in the thick fog of giving up and then competing. William's friends started a skewed competition because they wanted to control and possess Six for her attention. Their evil game got worse with each passing second. From their point of view, Chloe was no longer a person. She turned into a prize or award that could be won. She got a strange pleasure from being embarrassed. Even though the shame was awful, her body lied to her and responded to their touch with a forbidden pleasure that made her feel both sick and happy. She was trapped in a never-ending cycle of depravity and desire. Unable to break free from their attraction. His voice was dripping with temptation. There was an idea to take things to a whole new level of wrongdoing with the goal of being predatory. Chloe's neck tightened as she tried to breathe. She was very scared, even though she wanted to scream and run away from their twisted desires. Her body wouldn't move and her words got stuck in her mouth. There was a dim light in the bedroom, which was a place where she could be alone and completely give up control. The bed in front of her was a powerful altar for the sacrifice she was about to make. As they led her to it, it reminded her of all she had lost and all she was about to give up. She felt a creeping fear, like something terrible was about to happen, and it made her heart beat faster. Chloe could feel their eyes on her, wearing away at what little respect she had left. As they switched places with their moves, each guy putting pressure on her, her resistance broke down under the weight of their shared attention. She tried to stay calm as she pushed her limits and took down the walls she had built up around herself. But with each act of submission she felt herself losing control and falling into the void. Their commands made her body do what they wanted, while her mind was a mess of doubt and pain. She danced to their music on her own, like a distant echo, while William watched the whole thing. He seemed to be standing there from the entry. Shadow's aroused desire is a sharp reminder of how inappropriate the things he did with her were. He became silent out of shame, which was a loud sign of his evil wishes. Chloe was no longer recognizable. She was completely lost and had become a mere shell of the woman who used to be in charge of her heart. As the night went on, the hard truth hit her, making her feel heavy from the sin they both committed. There was no way to avoid this downturn or go back on the path she had been forced to take. She had fallen into a downward slide that made her a prisoner of her husband's betrayal and the ravenous hunger of his friends. William, who planned her demise, was sitting next to a mute guardian, watching her fall with sparkling eyes, with a grim pleasure as she fell into the darkness. Chloe realized that the night had come to this predictable end, which she should have seen coming as soon as she walked into that den of vipers. Still, it looks like she didn't have the luxury of planning and gave it up at the same time as her. There was a lot of stress in the room as William's friends looked at each other with knowing looks. This was the last thing they did, the worst thing they could do. It was the moment when they would stop pretending and Chloe would completely give in. They didn't spend much time on these animals. Their eyes were bright and their hands were greedy. Because Chloe's body was feeling so many strong emotions at once, it gave in to their uncontrolled cravings for a short time. She thought about whether this meant she had lost all of her identity and was now just a vessel for other people's happiness. As they switched places, their bodies pressed against hers and their hands felt every part of her naked skin. Her thoughts were a haze, all over the place and disorganized. Her body responded on its own. Chloe went through a lot of emotional turmoil and reached the lowest point of her degradation. She knew very clearly that she had lost all control and was now a puppet that her endless wants could control. The noise of her lust turned her own will into a faint echo. She couldn't go back to being the person she used to be. As the night went on, they got more violent and made more demands, which pushed her further into submission and erased any traces of her personality. Chloe's feelings changed wildly, going from being happy to being sad, making a confusing tapestry of excitement and degradation. Each moment, her sense of self got weaker, until she was left with nothing but a hollow shell. In the middle of all the chaos, William came out of the shadows and stood over Chloe like a hunter coming up on its prey. His presence was both familiar and strange in this setting when he joined the group. And Chloe felt a strange sense of relief. She was no longer alone, which was good. Being humiliated and knowing that her husband was involved made her sadness worse and made it more likely that she would lose it all. The man who had promised to love and protect her turned out to be involved in her death. The irony is a cruel turn of events. Eventually, as the night went on, the wild energy turned into tiredness, taking the place of the ravenous desire that had driven their wild behavior. Chloe lay down on the bed. Their abuse had left marks on her body, and her mind was a broken mess from being shackled. The knowledge that she had changed covered her like a suffocating shroud. And the room fell silent, leaving only the sounds of their laughing and rude statements. As each of the Williamses' friends left on their own, their faces showed what they were really after. William walked up to her and looked at the damage he had made. His eyes were filled with dark glee. Chloe took in his look. her heart heavy with the knowledge that this night had changed the course of events in a way that could not be fixed. During their whole life together, she gave up everything. Her spirit was broken, and they could not escape the darkness they had both accepted. His smile was slow and deliberate, making fun of the love they used to share in a mean way. He had won, and Chloe knew that things between them would never be the same again. She was now just a thing that he could use or throw away whenever he wanted. The understanding engulfed her, wiping out any last traces of who she used to be. The events of that night had changed her life, and she could not get away from this new reality.